Angie Viscianen, and I am the founder of Leg Up Legal. We have a mentoring program that connects prospective law students to lawyers so that they can learn more about the legal profession before starting law school. And we started doing these Zoom meetups during the COVID-19 pandemic so that you all can learn from actual practitioners and get to bond with each other during these tough times. And so I've been bringing in 2 lawyers every week to come chat with you about different career paths and different things that might help you on your path to becoming a lawyer. So I'm excited today to introduce Frank Ramos, who is a partner at Clark Silverglade. And I'm going to be talking to you today about improving your communication skills, written and online. So I will let Frank take it away.
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with all of you about this. Today we'll be talking generally about communication, mostly written, but some oral communications as well. In terms of online communications during this time, when we're all at home and we're kind of stuck behind our computers, it's a great time to develop relationships online, primarily through LinkedIn, but other platforms as well. And to do so, you have to be able to, reach out and communicate with others on LinkedIn and these other platforms. And to do that, you need to learn a little bit more about the contact or contacts you're reaching out to, and spell out why you want to reach out to them. You may have a common interest. You may be from the same state, or the person you're reaching out to practices in a certain area or has a certain profession you're interested in. When you introduce yourself, obviously do it in a professional manner. Introduce yourself as somebody who is interested in what they do. You can address them as Mr. or Mrs. if you like. You can also address them by the first name. That's perfectly acceptable. And use an explanation as to why you're reaching out. Use full sentences. Try to focus on active verbs and try to avoid a lot of the shorthand that we use when we text each other or that we sort of instant message one another. I think there's a divide these days between how we communicate with our friends and close family, where we use a lot of abbreviations and emojis and similar communications on our phones, and how we do so in a business context. And the more appropriate way of communicating with others is through this more formal means. And I don't mean to suggest that we use, big words or sort of archaic phraseology, but I do mean to sort of stay away from a lot of abbreviations and short texts and things like that, and kind of use full sentences and engage in an active voice. And what I mean by that is typically most sentences are noun, active verb, and object of the verb. You start a sentence with the noun or the subject of the sentence, and you follow that with the active verb. The person is doing something, and that's the active verb, and then you explain what they're doing. That's the object of the sentence. And it may sound like it gets a bit redundant, but if you can try to reduce your sentences to that type of format, you'll find that you're saying more with fewer words. And so much of communication these days is trying to say more with less. We all have shorter attention spans. I remember when I was young and I'd go to the bookstore and buy novels, they would typically run between 300 and 500 pages. These days there are not as many bookstores, but when you download them on your phone, it's not uncommon to see novels that are only 150, 200 pages long. There are novelists who are now writing these short fiction series where it can be read just in an hour or two, on the plane or while you're on the train or somewhere. And so I think we all have shorter attention spans. We all get notifications on our phone regarding breaking news stories. We get short text messages on Facebook and LinkedIn. We're limited to the number of characters. LinkedIn, by the way, is 1,300 characters. Twitter, I think, is now 280 characters. And so we've all become very accustomed to saying more with fewer and fewer words. And so I think it is a good habit. I think being able to communicate with using fewer words is very helpful. And I think that's something when people go to law school, it's a talent they don't really develop as much as they should. And once you become a lawyer, you'll find that a lot of law firms and judges and clients appreciate you getting to the point and getting to it as quickly as possible and as succinctly as possible. But there is a tension between doing that and doing it too colloquially, or doing it in such a way that you're kind of doing it very casually. And so when you're communicating with folks online, or when you're emailing, we can kind of transition to emails to others. At some point when you are interacting with people on a platform, you're going to want to take that relationship offline and either have a phone call with them, or maybe exchange emails and have an in-person meeting once COVID gets behind us. And in emails, you want to be a little bit more formal. Again, you want to express your thoughts in complete sentences. You want to get to the point. You don't want to kind of beat around the bush, but you want to do it as professionally as possible. And it takes some practice. I've been a lawyer now for about 23 years, and sometimes it's easy to digress and be a little bit too friendly or informal in emails. And I think a good rule of thumb when you're drafting an email to someone you don't know particularly well, especially in the professional context, is that if this email were to get published somewhere, or to be attached to a motion, or be shared with others, what would others think of you? How would that reflect on you as an individual and professionally? So always kind of keep that in mind. Long term, the relationships you're building today, in whether you're an undergrad or law school, are relationships that may turn into a job offer down the road. And people who are in a position to hire you are looking at your communication skills. And the more rudimentary they are, the harder it is to get a position or job with that company, or with that law firm, or with that organization. So from early on, any communications you have with third parties, with individuals who are more senior than you, who one day may be in a position to hire you, refer you to somebody who can, always keep it very professional, and try to express yourself in a way that you're confident, obviously, that you know exactly what you're saying, that you're not beating around the bush, and you're not trying to put on airs with large words, or legalese or anything else like that, but you're doing it in such a way that expresses and puts yourself in the best position possible. And it's a skill set. I highly recommend that you get 1 or 2 books on writing for lawyers. I have a few behind me. Let me pull back here a second. And a book I recommend a lot to lawyers and law students, and even people in undergrad, even high school, is this book called The Elements of Stronghold by Gardner White. It's a very short book. It's less than 100 pages long. And if you download it, I think you can get the downloadable version for $3 or $4. And it's worth the investment. Again, it's The Elements of Style by Gardner White. It's largely a grammar book, but it has a lot of advice on just how to write well and succinctly. Something you'll hear a lot once you start working at a law firm, or a governmental agency, or a nonprofit, is how important your written communication is, and how important it is to be able to say things by getting straight to the point and doing it in a very forceful and persuasive way. And that takes time and practice. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn that skill very well, but get a jump on that. And, Gardner White is one of the books I recommend. There are other books out there that are generally available. What I would suggest is you do a search on Amazon and do a search for books on grammar, books on legal writing, books on communication skills, and take the time. We're all very busy, even in this time when we may have a little bit more downtime, so we're spending more time at home. Use that time wisely and to your advantage by maybe once a month reading a book on communication. The first book or 2 could be on written communication, and then later books can be on oral communication, and we'll get that to oral communication shortly. But so much of writing and so much of communication is having a strong opinion about something and getting to that point as quickly as possible. I think lawyers were kind of taught to, I don't know if beat around the bush is the right phrase, but we're always trying to have it both ways. On the one hand this, and on the other hand that, and we're always trying to couch certain things so that we have an out. It's very mealy mouth, I guess. And I don't think that's what clients want. Judges don't want that. Your supervisor doesn't want that. They want a straight answer to their question. Think about if you were in their shoes and you asked a direct question to somebody, you would want a direct answer. You wouldn't want a long answer. You wouldn't want something that constantly provided both sides and never really provided an answer, just kind of threw a bunch of information and left it to the reader to decide for him or herself what your opinion was, and that's not really effective writing, not particularly persuasive. So books like The Elements of Style and other books really help you achieve that. And if you just give me a second here, there's some other books. There's a author by the name of Brian Gardner, and this is The Elements of Legal Style. Brian Gardner is probably one of the leading, if not the leading, legal writer out there. And he actually has a blog, and I think he has an email chain that you can register for. And I don't know if it's daily or weekly, but he gives daily or weekly writing tips and writing advice, and his website has a lot of free information. He also sells some very expensive classes, but his books are fantastic. This is just one of them, Elements of Legal Style, and there's some others that I have on my shelf behind me. And even at my vintage, being 23 years out, I still go and spend time reading books on writing because it's a lifelong skill, and it always is one that you can develop and hone and improve upon. So certainly that's what I recommend. Now, transitioning to oral communication, so much of what we do as lawyers is what we do orally, both in terms of hearings, in terms of taking depositions, in terms of communicating with clients over the phone, communicating with partners in their offices. And so I think the thing with oral communications is having a certain level of confidence or gravitas, which kind of comes with time. And what I recommend to young individuals, whether you're still in law school or you're undergrad or wherever you may be, is to seek out opportunities where you're engaging in public speaking. And it could be debate, it could be presentations, it could be speaking to a local middle school, it could be your Sunday school. It doesn't really matter. Your local Rotary Club, Toastmasters is a wonderful organization. I don't think it's limited by age. At least I don't think it is. And Toastmasters, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an international organization of basically it's a public speaking organization that teaches public speaking skills. And they typically meet once a week. They have chapters all over the country. The annual dues, I think, is $70 or $80, which really isn't very much, and certainly is worth the investment. And you can probably
a lot of university chapters too, Frank, where they can join for free.
Oh, okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you jumped in on there. It's a great opportunity to get together with others who typically the chapter leader is somebody who is higher up in the organization or they've been with the organization a bit, and they run these meetings where part of the meeting is to teach new speaking skills. They pick new attendees every week to provide presentations or different types of presentations you're supposed to give, whether it's table talks or a long form or a short form, and then the people in the group critique you, and it seems like a little bit overwhelming, but it really isn't. It's a very supportive environment, and it's really sort of the environment that you kind of need to expose yourself. I think lawyers who at an early age or who in high school or college or law school spent their shared time engaging others in a public format are much better lawyers. They just, first of all, they feel a lot more comfortable in front of an audience, whether the audience is a judge or the client or a jury, if you're going to be a trial lawyer, or at some point, if you want to generate business, you're probably going to have to get in front of large crowds and give speeches on substantive topics or something maybe not so substantive, but something that is of interest to the audience. And it takes time to, one, get comfortable in front of people. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. But you have to do it you have to do it repeatedly. And I think Toastmasters is a good venue for that. And then two, not only in terms of just being comfortable, but just learning your delivery, learning what your speech pattern is, learning what your cadence is, learning how to breathe in a way that you understand that you have to take in air and that as you speak, you're expelling air, learning to project your voice, learning to be comfortable with your body and your body language. Each of us have different body types. Some of us are tall, some of us are shorter, some of us are larger, some of us are smaller. But no matter how we look physically, each of us has the capacity and the ability to own the room that we're in when we're communicating and speaking. But that takes time. That takes a lot of energy, and it takes practice. It just I don't know how else to say this, but when you start speaking publicly, you're gonna suck, because I sucked, and I sucked for a long time, and it's really a little overwhelming, and you have to kind of get over that hump where you're like, okay, well, now I don't suck as much, and now I'm not so bad, and now I'm pretty good. And to get from sucking to being great is a long path, and it takes a lot of presentations. And so a place like Toastmasters gives you sort of a safe environment to do that. So another place, which I've done, is taking an improv class. Most major cities have one or more improv troops, and these days are doing it virtually, which I don't know how great that is, but hopefully we'll be able to be with each other in person soon. But for the cost of an improv class, you really learn how to think on your feet, and that's what improvisation is really kind of reacting to the moment. And so much of what we do as lawyers is getting thrown a curveball and trying to hit it out of the park, and not striking out the plate. And that comes with being comfortable just reacting to situations. And so that's improv is another thing. Your local theater is another thing if you really want to invest that much time. Another thing to do is look for online public speaking courses. I have a public speaking coach that I pay for classes periodically. He's actually a voice coach. He teaches pop and jazz vocals, but a lot of what he teaches me is how to project, how to own my space, how to use body language, how to, so much of public speaking is controlling your breathing. And I didn't know that. I had no idea before I started really looking and studying into it and realizing that, and controlling how fast you speak or how slow you speak. When you get nervous, you tend to talk more quickly. You tend to cut yourself off. You round off words. Sometimes you mumble. You just want to get it done. You just kind of want to get off the stage. And so, being able to get over that stage fright and really controlling the way you speak and communicate is a skill. And like any other skill, it takes time. It's, be similar to deciding tomorrow you're going to run a marathon. Obviously, you can't run a marathon next week if you've never run before. But if you gave yourself 6 months or maybe even a year, and you started out running a half mile, then a mile, then a mile and a half, you could see within a few months how you can easily get to running a marathon and competing in a marathon and being in much better shape. And when you first start the process, you're like, well, I'm never going to be able to run 26.2 miles. But 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, okay. I mean, it's still a challenge, but it's certainly one I can overcome and handle. And public speaking is no different. And writing is no different. Writing, something to improve your writing, I strongly recommend, is to try to get published at an early age. You don't have to wait until you're a lawyer. You don't have to wait until you're in law school. The law school is a good time. And I'm not really meaning law review articles, so those are good, and those are a great way to augment your resume, but there are hundreds of publications and online forums and blogs and websites and online publications that are starving for content and copy and would love to have somebody write something for them. And if you can get a few articles under your belt at an early part of your career, you will go a long way in distinguishing yourself. If I were to get a resume from first or second year lawyer, and they had already published a dozen articles, and that sounds like a lot, and I'll explain to you why it isn't. But if they had already published a dozen articles, that resume would be sort of the top of my list. And when I say articles, again, I'm not talking about these long, drawn-out law review articles. Those are great. That's perfectly fine. I'm talking about articles that are between 600 and 1,000 words that don't require a whole lot of research. It's more sort of, your take on A, B, or C. And it's a little bit more colloquial, a little bit more casual. Again, it's done professionally, it's written effectively, but it isn't sort of something you'd read. It's not some sort of tome or treatise. It's very much an article you'd probably read in a local publication or a certain blog. And so if you get into and again, just like public speaking with articles, the first few articles, they're not to be that great. I've written probably over 400 articles. I want to say the first 50 articles I wrote, I don't really have them anymore. I just threw them all out at some point. I was just kind of embarrassed by them. But going back when I started writing in 2001 and 2, they were very rudimentary. They were okay, I guess. They're perfectly fine, I suppose, but they're very unremarkable and unmemorable. And not to say that I'm, some fantastic writer today, so many years later, but I certainly have improved. And I find myself being able to write more effectively, more efficiently, more quickly, to the point where, if I was in an assignment for a publication, and they said, oh, I need 800 words, I could probably type that out in an hour, 90 minutes with little research and turn it around. And it would have very few, if any, mistakes or typos, and pretty much run with it. And that's a process over a number of years, just like running a marathon. You get to the point where now you're running a marathon. Now maybe you're thinking of running multiple marathons. You're running all these ultra marathons because you've constantly pushed yourself and gone to the next level.
Yeah, actually, I was wondering if you could talk real quick also about communicating over like Zoom or over these virtual events that like so many people have been attending. What are some tips that you have for people who are either speaking at Zoom events or they're participating in Zoom events and they're trying to be interactive?
Oh, of course, of course. These days, most of our meetings are taking place on these virtual platforms, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Meeting or whatever it might be, and they're multiple platforms. And I would encourage all of you to seek those out. This is obviously a great one. There are others out there where you have an opportunity to meet and greet potential contacts, potential future employers, and have sort of an elevator speech prepared. And that's sort of a common phrase that's used, and it comes from the fact that you may bump into someone in an elevator, and you have just a few seconds to introduce yourself. And so maybe in 10 or 15 seconds, be able to say, well, I am so-and-so, and I do so-and-so, or I'm from so-and-so, or whatever it might be. For myself, I'm Frank Ramos from Miami, and I'm the managing partner of litigation boutique Clark Silverglade. And there's probably 10 different permutations of that, but you want to be able to identify who you are, where you're from, and what you do in just a sentence or maybe two sentences. And when you jump into one of these Zoom calls, it's really a good opportunity to meet individuals. You just don't know who you may meet, that you may be able to help, and they may be able to help you, or each of you may be able to put others in contact, and you may be able to become one of these connectors where there's a friend of yours who needs help and you meet somebody who can help them, or vice versa. So there are really so many opportunities and so many different permutations of way we can assist and communicate with each other on this forum. So one, I would recommend that you do seek out opportunities to join these forums, and once you're on them, introduce yourself, make a point to if you can, keep your camera on. If you can, when the opportunity is right, speak with others in the forum, share something about yourself, but also make a point to learn more about others. I think a good skill set about communicators is that whenever I try to talk to anybody, I try to make it mostly about them. And so any conversation I have is probably 20 to 30% of me speaking and 70, 80% of the other person speaking. So I really get to know them. They get to talk about themselves. Everybody loves to talk about themselves. Everybody loves to share stories about who they are, about their family, about their hobbies, about their job. And what's kind of paradoxical is that, I've had these conversations where I've said very little, and the person kind of left saying, oh, you're a great conversationalist. And it's kind of ironic because I did very little talking. But I think what I did is that I was able to facilitate him or herself talk about themselves. And that's sort of also a skill. I think, we live in a society where we're very much about who we are, what we do, and what our interests are. And it's hard to transition and move beyond ourselves to what others want and need and want to talk about. But if you, in terms of communication skills, in terms of being on these Zoom calls, if you can find a way to facilitate the conversation and make it about the other person and learn about what they're interested in, some common icebreakers, obviously, what do you do? If you're in school, what school do you go to? What are you studying? What are your future plans? Where do you have any travel plans? Are you, how has COVID treated you? What's, and try to find, some mutuality. People like folks who have similar interests. And so early on in the conversation, try to explore what similar interests you may have. It may be that both of you love pets and both of you are involved in your local humane society, or you help stray animals. Maybe both of you are very much about the environment. Maybe both of you love sports, and not only do you love sports, but you actually have similar interests in terms of a type of sport and a given sports team. Or even maybe there's a rivalry, but it's a pleasant one where you guys are on opposite sides, but you guys can have some fun talking about, whatever sport it is. And that gets me to another point where so much of communication is having a large um, supply of information to share with other people and being able to have some facility in communicating on various topics. And what I recommend that you do is that you read a lot. It's these days there's just so much news available. There's so much information available. So much of it's free. There are a lot of aggregator websites that are out there that you can download apps for and will provide you information across the whole political spectrum, across all the different types of areas, everything from politics to news to sports to business to biographies to movies to pop culture. And no matter what you love, try to explore some stuff that you may not love that much. I'm not a big sports person. I don't really follow sports. I don't remember the last sports event I actually watched on television, but I make a point to read about sports because it's still very popular and still a lot of lawyers talk about sports. I don't play golf. I don't know anything about golf, but I make a point to know who's the top golfers are, because a lot of more senior lawyers still go out and golf and they love talking about golf. And it's really uncomfortable to be in a conversation where you cannot contribute anything to the conversation. And it seems a little artificial, I suppose. It seems like, why are you going to spend time learning about things you're not that interested in just so that you can have a conversation with somebody who is interested in that area? But so much of what we do is networking and fellowship and communicating with one another. And so much of that is based on the needs and wants of the person on the other side of the communication. And none of us really, each of us is limited in terms of what we're interested in. I have only so many interests. So I make a point to at least be somewhat aware of what's going on, including pop culture, including music, including movies. So if anything comes up, I can at least, in a superficial way, engage in that conversation and draw out something that is of interest to that person.
Yeah, those are really good points, Frank. I think also just doing your research on the person so that you know a little bit about what they're interested in. I mean, if you are engaging in a Zoom call that's one-on-one, for sure, if you already can go look at that person's LinkedIn profile or look at their bio or just Google search their name and see, what have they written about, what have they talked about, and you can find out a little bit more about what might interest them so that you can have something in common to chat about. And, when you're on these calls, if you're in a group setting, reach out to the people afterwards and say, hey, I saw you put that comment in the chat box. I thought that was really interesting. Or I saw that, you spoke on this event the other day and I really appreciated what you had to say about XYZ. Reach out to people and use that commonality, right? To bond.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of getting a benefit from a relationship is developing the relationship. And a relationship isn't just saying hello or having a 30-second chat on a Zoom call. It's following up with the person, as you suggested, afterward. It's meeting up with them for coffee or virtual coffee, there's different studies, but most people believe it takes between 8 and 12 actual connections develop a real relationship where somebody will really remember you, will really think about you, will have you on the forefront of their minds when they need something. And think about that, it's 8 or 12 connections. But if you are, let's say, for example, active on LinkedIn or another platform where you're posting regularly, you're constantly on their feed. If you are regularly engaging on Zoom calls where these people are also participating, then you're interacting with each other. If you're involved in some sort of organization, a nonprofit or a charity, and these days, again, most people are meeting virtually, but if you're doing that on a regular basis and you're developing those relationships, there are so many ways of getting a job, of getting an internship, of getting some sort of opportunity, but all those are really ultimately based on relationships. The old adage, it's who you know, is very true. And if you don't know people, you can get to know them, but it takes time and it takes consistency and it takes some repetition. And
yeah, and it's not only who do you know, but how well do they know you? It doesn't help you that
right.
much if they can't remember who you are. So you have to nurture those relationships, exactly like he's saying. It takes multiple reach outs. I think a lot of the students that I talk to, they'll reach out to me once. We'll have a Zoom coffee chat or a Zoom virtual chat, and then they'll completely disappear into the ether, and I'll never see them again. And then they come by a year and a half later and they're like, I need an internship. Can I get something from you? And I'm like, I don't even remember who you are. So, I think it's really important that you do take those steps to continue nurturing that relationship. And like Frank said, you can use technology nowadays to help you do that. If you're posting on LinkedIn regularly, just think of that as a way that you can keep in touch with all of your connections. It's more FaceTime with them. And it doesn't involve you having to reach out every single time and having a one-on-one, but at least they're seeing your name. They're being reminded of you. They see that you're out there doing great things and that you're making progress, and that's important to your connections too. So, Frank, what are some of the things that the common mistakes that you see attorneys making at the beginning of their career when it comes to communication?
I think a lot of it is just being a little bit too casual. I think maybe being a little bit too trusting, especially when it comes to opposing counsel. When you first start your career, understand that there are some people out there that will try to take advantage of you. There'll be clients that will try to take advantage of you, opposing counsel, maybe even partners in your own firm. And you have to be conscious of it. I don't think you have to be too conscious of it, but you have to have that in the back of your mind, and that what we do as lawyers has to be very specific and very thought out and well reasoned, because we can casually say something that may inadvertently disclose something we're not supposed to disclose, or we are agreeing to something we shouldn't agree to. I think a common example, this is just something anecdotally I remember early on in my career. When you're a young lawyer, you're often asked by a partner to get an extension of time to respond to something, and so you'll call and you'll say, "Oh, can I get 20 days to respond?" And a lot of times the other side is like, "I'll give you 20 days to answer." And those are two very different words in the context of litigation. Answering means you actually have to file an answer to, let's say, a complaint, or file an answer with no objections to discovery, whereas responding means you can move to dismiss, or you can object, or whatever else. And as a young lawyer, you may not really appreciate the distinction, and the opposing counsel probably realize you don't appreciate the distinction and traps you into saying answer as opposed to motion. You then tell your partner, "Oh yeah, we have 20 days to respond," not really appreciating the distinction, and suddenly you've committed to something you didn't want to commit. That's a very specific example, but it sort of spells out what I'm trying to suggest, that when you start communicating in a legal forum with other folks, that's why clarity is so important. That's why being concise and getting to the point is so important, because the ambiguity never really works for you. Like, being purposely ambiguous never really helps. And so being able to understand where the other side is coming from and how they're trying to use language against you, because language can be very much a sword as much as it is a shield sometimes, appreciating that. And that comes with experience, unfortunately. Sometimes if people are going to traps you at an early age, and you don't have, or early part of your career, you don't have a partner looking over your shoulder, a more senior associate, you may fall a few times. I certainly did when I was young, and it happens, and you learn from those experiences and you move forward from them. But so much of communication, especially early on, is sounding professional, sounding confident. And if you don't know the answer to your question, you don't have to answer it right away. You don't have to take that call right away. I typically let things go to voicemail, because I never know who the hell's calling me or what they have to say, and I kind of want them to leave me a voicemail message so I know how to respond to it, and so I have time to think about it. One of the worst things is getting a call from a client out of the blue, and they have a very specific question, and you feel pressured to give them an answer because they expect an answer, and you have to have the confidence to say, "Okay, I'll get back to you on that." And so
That's actually one of the key things that I think is the hardest for a very young associate, because you always feel pressured, like, I need to know the answer. When your partner asks you, "Hey, do you know the answer to, when is this due? Or when was the next date for us responding to something?" or whatever it is, you always feel that pressure, like, I need to respond right away. And I think the biggest trap that you can fall into is to guess. Never want to guess. You can always
yes,
say, You can always say, I'm not sure, I think it's this, but let me confirm, or, I will go find that answer and report back to you immediately, whatever it is, but don't guess. I have too many students that whenever I ask them, do you know what this means? And sometimes that's, legitimately, I'm not trying to ask you a trick question. I'm just asking you, do you actually know what this means? Or do you know what this deadline is? And if you don't know, but you guess, it sounds like you know what you're doing, but if you don't and you get it wrong, there could be huge consequences. So just make sure that you always say, I'm not quite sure. Let me go find the answer for you. I'll report back with it. But
Yeah, clarity is so important whenever a partner or associate communicates something to you. It's better that you sound dumb up front and ask them questions than jump to certain conclusions and you worked on a project or you spend a lot of time researching something they didn't want, especially if it's time sensitive and you started going down some rabbit hole, which seemed to make total sense to you because the way you interpreted the assignment, but you weren't sure. If you would have asked one more question, we realized it was something completely different that they wanted from you. So much of early on is communications, and I think most lawyers, at least certainly and I think most of the lawyers I would hope, know that people who are just starting out don't have a lot of context, and so much of what we do requires context. And it's important to ask questions to get that context. Now, I like to think that I give all the necessary information when I give an assignment, but that's kind of naive for me to think that. And I think most lawyers don't. And so there's nothing wrong to ask questions to get a fuller sense of why you're being asked to do something. Having a sense of where the case is going, how the parties are defining a win, and what your role is in the overall strategic plan of that case is important to have.
I think context is also so important for you to ask about, because if you know immediately what this assignment is, but you don't know what the next step in the process is, then you can't really plan ahead for what's coming next. So it is important as a young associate for you to realize what the task at hand is, but then also ask, hey, what comes next? What should I be thinking about next that we can help prepare for? Because oftentimes if you only focus on the task right in front of you and you don't look at how it fits into the big picture, you might miss something. So absolutely, these are great tips. I love that even a managing partner says, sometimes I don't give the best directions. Like, it's so true. Like, we always, as lawyers, we think that we give great directions, but the fact is there's plenty of times that, I'm busy, I'm giving an assignment, and I don't realize I didn't tell that person when the assignment was due, or how long did I want them to spend on it, or what is the first step to doing that assignment? As a young associate, I remember being in a partner's office, they'd tell me what to do, I'd write it all down furiously, and I'd walk out of there, and then I'd have not the first clue on how to start on that thing. And so what would you do? You either run back into the office or you run back to your senior associate's office or whatever, and you're like, okay, what is the first step here? What should I do? And it's important that you ask the clarifying questions before it gets too out of hand. Ask them, is there a sample? Is there something that I can go off? Is there a template? Is there something that I can look at to guide me here? Because if you're starting from absolute scratch, you're probably going to mess it up. Do you have any other tips and advice for students who are about to pursue law school? I know legal writing for me in particular was really challenging once I got into law school. What is your advice for people who are about to start law school?
Yeah, I thought I was a pretty good writer until I started law school and I realized I wasn't a very good writer at all. And I'd recommend that before you start law school, that summer before, you spend some time reading some books on writing, on legal writing specifically. The books I suggested aren't that expensive. You can download them. Literally, downloaded versions are much less expensive than the hard copy versions, and really study it. It's a very different type of writing. It's not legalese, but it's very structured. You'll learn this concept called IRAC, issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. What's the issue, and then what's the legal rule that is brought about by that issue, and how do you analyze the rule and apply it to the facts, and based on that, what is the conclusion? And that's something, IRAC is still something I use today because 20 some years later, and because you're trying to figure out how the facts and the law apply to the circumstances of your client's case. And ultimately, when you, after you graduate and you pass the bar, you're gonna get real life cases. You're gonna have real clients coming into your office with real matters and real issues, and they don't know what the answers are, and looking to you to give them the answers. And being able to think through things logically and then reduce it to writing, because ultimately you're gonna have to file a motion, or you have to file a memo, or you have to send an email to the client, or correspondence, and being able to sort of spell that out in a very simple way, not simplistic, but simple, so that anybody can understand what the position is, whether it's good or bad. And then ultimately, if you want to take a position with the court, how to advocate on your client with what you have and the facts and the laws they are. That's all a long-term process. And if you can kind of get a jump on that before, because that will really, and also help you when you take finals. If you can write well, I think people who do well in law school typically are pretty good writers. At least when I went to law school, a lot of it was done on blue books. I don't know how it's done now, but if you can convey your thoughts in a well-reasoned, well-logical way and do it in a succinct way, that B can be a B plus, and that B plus can be an A minus. And two people who know the exact same information, but one who conveys it in a more thoughtful way will get the better grade in class.
Absolutely. So I want to go ahead and open it up now to questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to jump on camera and ask away, or feel free to ask them in the chat box and we'll get to them. But yeah, I mean, I had the same experience, Frank. I thought I was a good writer until I went to law school, and then I was like, nope, I'm a terrible writer. Because I mean, I came from the world of marketing. Everything that we wrote was, in marketing speak. So it was flowery, it was fun, it was supposed to catch your attention in, 3 seconds, but it was not deep legal analysis, that's for sure. And when I got into my first semester legal writing class, it was really harrowing. That first assignment that I got back, it was like a citation assignment, and my grade was terrible. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a totally different ball game. So, absolutely, take some time, as you and Frank's right too, like if you read legal writing materials, if you read a lot of legal blogs, or if you read, actual cases, you'll see that the writing is just very, very different. And it doesn't mean that your writing is wrong. It just means that your writing is not the same style. And
Right.
You'll have to adapt it to that style if you want to do well in law school, if you want to do well in the legal profession. So, but yeah, does anybody have any questions for Frank?
If you guys want to follow me, I have a page that's geared toward young lawyers, but law students and even college students can benefit from it. It's called www.miamimentor.com. It's miamimentor.com. And there's a bunch of free books there, and forms and videos and all sorts of things, and you may find it helpful. If you're kind of on the fence about whether or not to go to law school, it provides a lot of information about the practice, and either it'll convince you to jump in or scare you away from it. And each of those is fine, perfectly fine, depending on what you want to do with your life. So it's a good resource, and you're welcome to share it. And I think there's a way to contact me on the website. If you have any questions about the practice, feel free to reach out to me through the website.
That's awesome. Yeah, Frank is a very prolific writer. He's written 15 books, and he's also written tons of articles. And so he shares a lot of them on miamimentor.com. You can definitely check out all of his materials there. So, well, if we don't have any questions, I'll go ahead and let you go, Frank. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
For everything today.
Have a great one, everybody. And I know it's kind of an odd time, but stay safe, and hopefully soon we'll be able to see each other personally again.
Yeah, all right. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you on Thursday.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.